The sun rose over the dense jungles of the Bataan Peninsula on January 9, 1942, casting long shadows over the American defensive positions. Staff Sergeant Benjamin Morrett sat quietly in his M3 Stuart light tank, listening to the distant rumble of Japanese forces advancing. Reports had been coming in for weeks. Japanese tanks were superior, fast, and nearly invincible. Every American soldier who had seen one in combat had stories of fear, of retreat, of guns that bounced harmlessly off armor. Morrett's unit had avoided engagement whenever possible, following official doctrine that emphasized withdrawal over confrontation. Preserve the tanks, preserve the men, avoid unnecessary losses. But the jungle itself seemed to hum with tension, as though it knew what would happen next. Intelligence briefings had warned that the Type 97 Chi-Ha, with its 25 millimeters of armor and quick maneuverability, could shrug off American fire. Nobody knew for certain if the 37 millimeter guns of the Stuart could even scratch the Japanese tanks. The previous encounter between American and Japanese armor had ended without a shot fired, a retreat under the cover of trees, the memory of failure lingering like smoke. Morrett studied the approaching silhouettes through his tank's viewport. 8 medium tanks glinting in the morning sun, their cannons pointed forward, advancing with an air of unstoppable confidence. The American crews whispered nervously. Fear had governed their tactics for weeks, shaping every movement, every decision. Morrett's mind raced. He knew that following orders meant retreat, but retreat would only reinforce the myth of Japanese invincibility. Every fact, every report, every previous encounter told him that American armor was outmatched. Yet here, in this moment, he felt a surge of resolve. "We're going to find out what these guns can do," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. His crew exchanged glances, a mix of worry and anticipation. The first shot was fired from 600 yards, the 37 millimeter round ripping through the front of the leading Type 97. To the astonishment of all, it punched straight through the crew compartment, exited the rear armor, and buried itself in the jungle beyond. The myth of invincibility began to crumble in that instant. The Type 97, designed to fight infantry with light machine guns, was vulnerable to the small American gun, capable of penetrating over 60 millimeters at close range. One tank charged head-on to almost point-blank range, but the shell tore through both sides, leaving nothing but destruction in its path. The jungle echoed with the sound of explosions and splintering metal. Each destroyed tank reinforced a growing realization: American armor was not powerless. In just 18 minutes, 8 Japanese tanks lay in smoking wreckage, while not a single Stuart had been lost. Crews stared in disbelief, the air thick with adrenaline and the scent of burned metal. Morrett's gamble had paid off. The myth that had paralyzed American tank units across Bataan was dead. What had seemed impossible moments earlier, the defeat of these so-called invincible tanks, had become reality. For the first time, American soldiers saw that fear, not firepower, had been the enemy. The jungle, once a place of dread, became a proving ground. Reports of the engagement spread quickly through the battalion. 1 week later, the Americans faced 5 tanks against 12 Japanese Type 97s, and once again, Morrett's men destroyed 9 and damaged 3, 0 losses. Each encounter chipped away at the legend of the Japanese tanks, and every American crew that returned home carried new confidence. Morrett, quietly determined, knew this was only the beginning. The small gun that many had doubted would come to dominate Japanese armor throughout the Pacific, but for now it was proof that courage, observation, and a willingness to confront fear could change the course of battle. The jungles of Bataan held secrets, lessons forged in fire and steel, and as the smoke cleared, the men began to understand that the true invincibility of any weapon lay not in its design, but in the perception of those who faced it.
The morning after the first engagement, the jungle still smelled of burned metal and scorched earth, but Staff Sergeant Benjamin Morrett knew there was no time to savor victory. Reports indicated that more Japanese tanks were advancing, and this time the numbers would be even greater. Morrett had become an unlikely test of American armor, a measure of whether courage and skill could overcome fear and misjudgment. Official doctrine was clear: withdraw when outnumbered, preserve the tanks, avoid engagement with superior enemy forces, but Morrett had already challenged that, and the results spoke for themselves. Intelligence briefings continued to warn of Japanese superiority, yet he could not ignore the truth he had just witnessed. The 37mm gun was capable, precise, and lethal against Type 97 armor. He gathered his crew, their faces still etched with tension and disbelief, and spoke with calm conviction. "We know what we're facing now. We're not retreating. We're going to engage on our terms." Each man understood the risk. They were outnumbered nearly 3-1, with 8 enemy tanks advancing through the dense undergrowth, their engines roaring, their turrets swiveling. The jungle offered some cover, but it also limited visibility and maneuverability. Morrett studied the terrain carefully, calculating angles, lines of fire, and choke points where the Japanese tanks would be most vulnerable. Every decision would matter. As the enemy approached, Morrett directed his crew to split their positions, using the jungle to conceal movement and create the illusion of a larger force. They set up ambush points, anticipating the enemy's predictable advances. The first contact was tense. Through the dense foliage, the Japanese tanks emerged, confident, perhaps unaware that the Americans were ready to test their own weapons. Morrett ordered the first shot. The 37mm shell tore through the front armor of the leading tank, passing through the crew compartment with shocking efficiency. The second, third, and fourth shots followed in rapid succession, each one finding its mark. The Japanese crews, trained to expect American hesitation, were caught off guard. Panic spread among their ranks, a rare moment where courage faltered in the face of reality. Morrett's crew kept their focus, loading and firing, maneuvering with precision, exploiting every weakness in the Chiha's design. The tanks that had once seemed invincible were now vulnerable, and the Americans had the upper hand. Observing the destruction, Morrett noted the patterns. The 37mm gun could penetrate at long range, much farther than anyone had expected. The Japanese armor, effective against infantry but inadequate against these guns, was no longer a source of fear, but a target. Within moments, multiple tanks were disabled or destroyed. The crew moved with a synchronized rhythm, each member anticipating the next action, every command measured and deliberate. Morrett's leadership under pressure was decisive. He calculated risk and opportunity in real time, balancing aggressive engagement with the need to protect his crew. For the men inside the Stuarts, the lesson was profound. Confidence in their own weapons and training could overcome even overwhelming odds. Word of Morrett's action spread quickly through other units. Stories of tanks destroyed, of bravery under fire, began to replace weeks of fear and hesitation. Commanders began to reconsider doctrine, to question assumptions about Japanese armor. Morrett himself understood that this battle was not just about the immediate enemy, but about the psychology of warfare. Fear, once paralyzing, had been confronted, tested, and overcome. He watched the jungle carefully, noting the enemy's reactions, anticipating counterattacks, and planning the next engagement. Each tank that advanced became both a test and a teaching moment. By the end of the day, the battlefield was littered with destroyed Chihas, a testament to both courage and the underestimation of American firepower. Morrett had broken the rules, defied doctrine, and proved that initiative and tactical thinking could change the course of battle. For his crew, it was more than a lesson in gunnery, it was a transformation in mindset. They now understood that they were not powerless, that the enemy could be engaged and defeated, and that bravery combined with skill and knowledge was more potent than fear. As night fell over Bataan, Morrett reviewed the day's events, mentally preparing for the battles yet to come. The jungle had been a proving ground, a place where myths were shattered and the foundations of future victories were laid. Each destroyed tank, each well-aimed shot was a message. The era of fear was over, and American armor would rise to meet the challenge, one calculated engagement at a time.
The morning air in Bataan was thick with anticipation as the next engagement began to unfold. Staff Sergeant Benjamin Morrett and his crew knew that today's battle would test not only their courage, but the very limits of American armored tactics. The jungle was alive with movement, distant engine roars growing louder as the Japanese Type 97 Chiha tanks advanced. 8 medium tanks were approaching, each one glinting with the confidence of crews who believed in their own invincibility. Morrett's heart pounded, but his mind was clear. He had already proven that fear could be defeated, that American guns could penetrate the so-called impervious armor. Now it was time to put that knowledge into practice under the pressure of real combat. The first tank came into view, its turret swinging as it searched for targets. Morrett aimed the 37mm gun with careful precision, measuring distance, angle, and timing. The shot struck true, piercing the front armor, passing clean through the crew compartment and exiting the rear. The explosion tore through metal and wood alike, sending a shockwave through the undergrowth. The other Japanese tanks, now aware of the danger, attempted to maneuver, but the dense terrain limited their options. Morrett anticipated every move, using natural cover, angles, and timing to maximize the effect of every round. Over the next 18 minutes, a sequence of strikes unfolded with brutal efficiency. 8 Japanese tanks were destroyed, their crews stunned, their confidence shattered. Not a single American tank was lost. The fear that had gripped American armor units for weeks dissolved in the smoke and chaos. Morrett and his men had rewritten the rules in real time. Observers later noted the extraordinary effectiveness of the 37mm gun, a weapon that planners had dismissed as inadequate. It was now clear that, despite its small caliber, it could penetrate the Chiha's armor at distances exceeding a mile. The battle became a template for the future of American tank engagements in the Pacific. Morrett's crew learned not only to fire, but to read the enemy's behavior, to anticipate charges, and to exploit weaknesses. Each destroyed tank reinforced a growing confidence that would echo through the rest of the campaign. By the end of the engagement, the battlefield was littered with wreckage, smoke rising from twisted metal, a testament to what careful observation and decisive action could achieve. The myth of invincibility was no more. Morrett understood that the real victory was not in the number of tanks destroyed, but in the realization that American forces could take the fight to the Japanese and win. This encounter became a turning point, the first time American crews saw that skill, courage, and knowledge could overcome fear, doctrine, and numbers. The lessons learned in those 18 minutes would inform every subsequent tank engagement on Bataan. Morrett's leadership, calm under fire, precise and fearless, transformed his crew from hesitant soldiers into confident warriors. Each shot, each maneuver was a deliberate decision, a small act of defiance against the myths that had governed the battlefield. The jungles of Bataan had proven their lesson. Fear was the true enemy, and once confronted, it could be defeated. Morrett and his crew had not only destroyed 8 tanks, they had destroyed the illusion of Japanese invincibility and opened the door for future victories. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the twisted metal and scorched earth, Morrett took a moment to study the battlefield, already calculating the next engagement, already preparing for the larger battles to come. This was more than a fight against tanks. It was a fight against fear, ignorance, and the limits imposed by previous failures.
In those 18 minutes, history had changed, and the American armor units would never again underestimate what they could achieve under the right leadership, with the right weapons, and the courage to act when others would hesitate.
The days following the 18-minute battle were marked by preparation, tension, and a growing sense of determination. Staff Sergeant Benjamin Morrett knew that the Japanese would not wait long to test their armor again. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy was massing a far larger force, and this time the odds would be even more daunting. Morrett's battalion had only 18 M3 Stuarts, yet reports suggested that over 40 Japanese Type 97 Chihas were preparing for a full-scale assault. Morrett's body and mind were already bruised from continuous engagements, but the lesson of the first battle remained clear. Fear could be confronted and overcome. The battlefield became a chessboard, with Morrett anticipating every movement, every advance, every potential attack. When the first Japanese tanks appeared, they came with confidence and sheer numbers, their formations designed to overwhelm American positions. Morrett, though wounded in earlier skirmishes, quickly assessed terrain, lines of fire, and choke points where his smaller force could maximize impact. He also studied the enemy's behavior, noting patterns in their movement, how they tried to coordinate charges, and the mistakes caused by overconfidence. The battle began with the roar of engines and the sharp crack of cannon fire. Morrett personally directed his crew, coordinating each tank's position with meticulous care. Shots were fired in calculated sequences, exploiting the vulnerabilities of the Chiha's armor. One by one, Japanese tanks began to fall. Morrett, despite being hit by a rifle grenade, shrapnel tearing through his face and shoulder in 11 separate wounds, refused to leave the battlefield. "Keep loading," he told his crew, his voice calm but commanding. For 3 hours he continued to fight, directing the destruction of 10 tanks personally while bleeding from multiple injuries. The Americans moved with precision, each tank covering the other, each shot counted, every decision critical. By the end of the mass assault, 27 Japanese tanks had been destroyed and 12 damaged. Only 2 American tanks suffered damage, and none were destroyed. Morrett's leadership under fire became legendary, demonstrating the extraordinary impact of courage, tactical knowledge, and a refusal to yield under pressure. The Type 97 Chiha, designed for fighting infantry, was no match for coordinated American armor equipped with superior guns. Japanese tank crews were caught in a deadly reality they had not anticipated. The battlefield, once a place dominated by fear and perceived invincibility, now reflected calculated skill, coordination, and determination. Commanders on both sides took note. The Americans had proven that even outnumbered, well-led units could dominate larger forces when doctrine was adapted to real-world conditions. Morrett's actions influenced the entire approach to armored warfare in the Pacific, demonstrating the effectiveness of light tanks against supposedly superior medium tanks when strategy and firepower were correctly applied. The aftermath of the battle left a trail of wrecked tanks, shattered trees, and scorched earth. Crews walked among the wreckage, recognizing not just the physical victories, but the psychological shift that had occurred. Fear no longer dictated decisions. Knowledge, skill, and courage guided them. Morrett's example inspired other crews to take initiative, trust their training, and see the enemy not as an invincible force, but as a challenge that could be overcome with precision and daring. The mass assaults, the outnumbered battles, and the incredible odds faced by his battalion all reinforced one inescapable truth. The myths of invincibility had been shattered, and the American tanks, once underestimated, had earned a reputation for lethal effectiveness. The jungles of Bataan, once a place of fear and uncertainty, became the proving ground for a new kind of armored warfare, one that combined courage, calculation, and leadership to achieve results far beyond what anyone had imagined.
Morrett's example would echo through the rest of the campaign, showing that even in the most desperate situations, leadership and determination could turn the tide and leave a legacy of success that no myth or fear could overcome.
The battles at Bataan were over, but the story of Staff Sergeant Benjamin Morrett and his crew did not end on the battlefield. The jungles were quiet now, scorched earth and twisted metal marking the price of victory. Yet the lessons learned would resonate far beyond this peninsula. Morrett knew that the Type 97 Chiha, once feared as an invincible weapon, was now revealed for what it truly was, a tank designed to fight infantry, vulnerable to the smaller, more agile M3 Stuarts when handled with skill and courage. Across the Pacific, other American units would replicate the tactics he had proven, turning doctrine into action and myths into strategy. Morrett's own fate, however, was not one of immediate celebration. A few days later, he was captured by Japanese forces during their relentless advance through the peninsula. What followed would test him in ways no battlefield ever could. He endured the infamous Bataan Death March, suffering brutal conditions, starvation, and exhaustion. For 3.5 years, he remained a prisoner of war, enduring hardships that would have broken the resolve of most men. When he finally returned home, he weighed only half of his pre-war body weight, a living testament to survival against unimaginable odds. Yet Morrett's courage, his tactical brilliance, and his unwavering leadership had left an indelible mark on the Pacific War. His actions earned him the Silver Star, a recognition of heroism that few could truly understand. More importantly, his victories reshaped the perception of American armor. The 37mm gun, once dismissed as inadequate, proved its effectiveness against Japanese tanks throughout the Pacific. Kill ratios in tank engagements skyrocketed, often 20-to-1 or higher, demonstrating the devastating combination of skill, courage, and proper firepower. Over 1,000 Japanese tanks were destroyed by American forces using this gun, while fewer than 50 American tanks fell to Japanese fire. The myth of invincibility had been replaced by the reality of calculated combat and disciplined aggression. Morrett's story became a quiet legacy, remembered by those who served with him and recorded in after-action reports, archival documents, and the pages of military history. It was a story of how fear, often the greatest enemy, could be confronted, challenged, and destroyed by courage, innovation, and resolve. The jungles of Bataan, once a place of dread and uncertainty, had become a proving ground where ordinary soldiers became extraordinary through determination and skill. As the Pacific Campaign continued, the lessons of Bataan informed strategies, training, and doctrine, ensuring that American forces would face the Japanese with confidence rather than hesitation. Morrett's crew, once ordinary soldiers, became examples of what disciplined leadership and tactical insight could achieve, even against overwhelming odds. The jungles, once a place of terror and uncertainty, had become a proving ground for American determination, a place where myths were shattered and victories earned through intelligence, bravery, and precision. Morrett himself lived out his later years quietly, passing away in 1989 at the age of 71, far from the fanfare his actions might have deserved, but leaving a legacy that would shape armored warfare for generations. The Type 97 Chiha, feared and respected by many, became a symbol of overconfidence defeated by preparation, discipline, and courage. Morrett's story reminds us that in war, no weapon is truly invincible, and no strategy is flawless. The greatest victories are often won not by sheer numbers or superior machines, but by the men who have the courage to act, the intelligence to plan, and the will to fight when all odds seem against them. Every destroyed tank,
Every perfectly aimed shot, every decision under fire contributed to a legacy that would inspire generations of soldiers. In the end, Bataan was not just a battle of tanks, it was a battle against fear itself. Morrett and his crew had proven that with skill, bravery, and determination, even the most daunting enemy could be defeated. Their legacy would echo across the Pacific, inspiring soldiers, shaping doctrine, and proving that courage, once tested, could change the course of history. The jungles of Bataan, once a place of fear and uncertainty, now stood as a testament to the power of resolve, precision, and human will.